This episode of Between Turns is brought to you by our benevolent robot overlords, playing games with Jeff so we don't have to. And for those of you who can't get enough of the show here, you have my pity. But I also tell you to go over to facebook.com or boardgamegeek.com where you can join our guild and also join in the conversation. But now, the show.
Maybe this will stimulate you.
Yeah, do you want to share with the class?
Yeah. So I've been playing on boardgamecore.net, I think it's called. And boardgamecore.net is a site about the Splotter games. So they have Antiquity, Food Chain Magnate, The Great Zimbabwe, and Virsinden Volk, or whatever it's called,
Okay.
which is not Splotter, but it's a game about the East and West Germany. It's kind of Twilight Struggle. It's actually themed a lot like 1989, but instead of being just kind of it's basically just Germany, East Germany and West Germany, and that is all. But the gameplay is very similar to Twilight Struggle in that you're playing a card for ops, and then you're using it to essentially build infrastructure or play the event, which the events all do stuff that happened in the Cold War, kind of to be historical. So we've been playing that game, and he has been, from game one, literally just pounding my face in every single time we play. And part of that is that he really loves the game, and he's played it 30 times, maybe more. He's put all of his brain power into solving this game, or if not solving, at least learning at a high level as quickly as possible so that he could play competitive games online. It kind of brought up the discussion. I thought it was kind of weird that I don't play games that way at all. When I say that way, what I mean is when you play these games electronically, at least in this particular implementation of this particular game, it's card driven, so you have a deck of cards. Well, what the program does for you is when the cards are all dealt out, so you have your cards in your hand and your opponent has their cards in their hand, and then you have a tableau of cards that you're going to be drafting from, kind of like one of the PAX games. The computer lets you actually look up the other decks of cards, and it tells you exactly what cards have yet to come into play. Through that, you can also count like how many effects are left in the deck. So, for instance, if the game is about moving the socialism bar, left or right, the game will tell you how many cards in the deck will move the slider to the right, and how many are left that'll move the thing to the left. And you can actually do the math and see like, oh, there's only 3 points of movement left, and I'm 6 points away from where I need to be, so I no longer can pursue that victory condition, or I no longer need to pursue that victory condition. And there's 5 different bars you're kind of competing in, moving sliders on in this game. And I keep saying his name, and we're not supposed to be doing that. The guy I'm playing is using this as a tool. He knows before he takes his turn, he goes, these are the 4 paths I can take, and then he'll like pull up that section of the game, and he'll read those card forms, or read the the stats of what's left in the deck, and then make his determination about what the most effective way to play will be, and then he'll continue playing. In most games of that nature, like card counting and anticipation and all of that is part of being good at those games. So I can't fault him for doing it in any way. But to me, that just sucks all of the kind of entertainment value out of it, And I just find it interesting because I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's wrong. When I wanted to get better at poker, I went and learned all the the percentages of what you could expect and when you can expect it, and that's literally no different, right? I mean, it's not any different than doing that in this game. Yet I don't know. I feel like when I'm playing poker, there's not a story being told. There's not a tale being weaved, and it feels like you're playing the game with one of those video game cheat books that just lets you beat the 40-hour game in 15 hours. And that's cool, I guess, but why are you robbing yourself of 30 hours of enjoyment, and I kind of feel when you play one of these games, I would organically pick up that information. If I played that game 30 times, I would start to know, hey, this deck is heavy in these traits. The middle-aged deck is slanted to the east. The late deck is slanted to the west, et cetera, et cetera. You would kind of learn that organically as you played. When this way, like, my second game in, he's like, well, here's all the things you need to look at. Here's all the ways you need to know how to play. And to me, I feel like that is robbing me of that exploration. It's robbing me of that
the discovery, right? Yeah.
Right. And, I just wondered how you view that sort of thing, and again, there's not a single answer, and it's not an arbitrary, it is an arbitrary thing, but it's not, I know there isn't an answer. I just found it really interesting that someone who seems to enjoy these games very, very much like we do with like the little stories that are being told and everything in the games, would really dive into a game from that angle. And how do you play games? Like, do you take that track, or do you take different tracks depending on different games, or how do you approach that?
So I've told you about my buddy that I play Through the Ages with, have I?
Well, not about him specifically. You've told me about your experiences playing Through the Ages.
I'm already off track. It's hard to do late at night. This is usually when I'm running around like a ferret.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I'm kind of a night owl. So back to the story. I have a very close friend with whom I play Through the Ages, and whenever I say, "Hey, I just wrapped up a game of Through the Ages," like I just did, 8 minutes ago, it's typically with him. Now, I've played some 60 or 70 games between the two versions of Through the Ages, with this one opponent, exclusively. And you would think with that much commitment on his part that surely I'm talking about someone who has gaming as a chief hobby, right? And would identify as a gamer. But he doesn't. He plays games, and we've had some kind of long-standing rivalries on, isolated games. Like, we played a lot of Stratego back in college and that kind of stuff. But most of his free time is kind of spent elsewhere and otherwise. I introduced the game to him one night, and he liked it enough that it kind of became the regular thing that we did during our hangout sessions on the web, when we just wanted to kind of talk and catch up with each other and do that kind of stuff. And we did this for a month or so, and then all of a sudden he just started completely blowing me out of the water. Like total destruction, always able to kind of do everything right, and I kind of got snapped into a realization that either I was really bad at gaming or he had some sort of epiphany. He was just doing it with so much ease, right? It's not just that he was beating me. It's that he was beating me with so small an amount of effort that he could then tell me turn by turn which of my priorities were wrong and all the ways I neglected to deny him resources and all the ways that I could have been more efficient with my actions, and just pretty much tell me everything I was failing to do. and I'm kind of I'm a 15-year board gaming veteran at this point, and like I said, this is maybe only the third or fourth game that we've kind of had rivalries with. And typically I kind of get the upper hand of these things. So, and then on top of that, Through the Ages is not really a simple game. You're managing the generation of 4 resources. You have your action points that you're trying to use turn by turn to navigate these escalating tech trees and options, of things you can do as the ages come out and what have you. And he was able to negotiate all of this and make sense of the routes to the things that he needed while watching my tableau and managing his turn-by-turn actions to build his own tableau. And it was just amazing because it caught me completely off guard how thoroughly he understood the game that quickly. And, full honesty here, he's a smart guy, and I wouldn't put it past him just to sort of figure this out entirely on his own. But it just happened so quickly, and it happened, without me kind of witnessing it.
Right.
So I just asked him, am I just this boring that you can focus on the game this hard while we're talking? Or, have you been playing, games on the side? And his response was, oh yeah. I mean, I love this game so much that I started playing online from time to time with strangers just for fun. And what he sort of realized and pointed out was that when the two of us were playing, we're just talking the whole time, right? I mean, the game's going on in the background. We do discover stuff and point things out, but when he would step away and play with strangers, he wasn't doing any of that. He wasn't using it as a bowling alley to hang out with a friend. He was just there to play the game. And as a result, he found himself studying every single thing that the game was showing him. And just like you pointed out, the online implementation shows so much more information than the board implementation and in this really quick, easy to glance over format, right? So he would start his turn. This is even if he's playing in real time. He would click over to his opponent's tableau, study to see what had changed, flip over to the journal that logs everyone's actions, and then look at the path they kind of took to make those decisions, right? To kind of see where they were headed. And then he would go back and take his turn.
Wow.
He would make his decisions then based not only what he kind of thought his goal should be in order to kind of keep up with his opponent, but he would start to kind of figure out what this turn-by-turn trajectory was, and then try to either cut the opponent off or go a direction that would shoot him up the point or the science or the resource tracks quicker.
That sounds similar.
All of this was kind of made easy by playing against a silent stranger, right? On the table, you kind of see this a bit more too, right? Where if you were sitting there with someone you didn't know, you might be more willing to dig in deeper to the game because you wouldn't have things kind of getting in the way of seeing the game. I mean, and a lot of it's stuff that we enjoy, like the jokes and kind of goofing off. The things you do with friends like that sometimes gloss over the deeper mechanical connections. And then on the flip side too, sometimes with people you play with frequently, you can fall into a metagame of sorts where you're playing the people rather than playing the game simply because you have a history.
Yeah, and it's pure competition. There's not any other things happening around the game.
So it's interesting to think that when you kind of remove the umbrella, right, of the social parts of games that we've talked about that we really, really enjoy, or if those things get removed because you're in a less social situation, like playing against a stranger or playing in a way where you can't interact with the person, the game really starts to function much more like the movement of pieces on a board. And I don't think this necessarily makes the game soulless entirely, but I almost kind of feel like it short circuits a lot of the interaction that I typically have with the game. Regardless of whether I punch it and purchase it and teach it, or someone brings it to me. I mean, in both of those cases, the arc that I go down, it typically starts with discovery. It's discovery first. This is the fun part. It's not even the fun part. It's the exhilarating part that makes a game likely to stay on my table. I mean, not only am I starting to see those layers and connections, but the game is starting to kind of reveal new conflicts as I learn the mechanics. And each one of those new mechanics opens up this new arena, like this new place, this new field of battle within the sandbox of the game that I can start to kind of nudge and use to push us toward whatever the goal of the game is. That process of bit by bit discovery, it's almost like the stages of a rocket.
Yeah.
The first play, where everyone's laughing and having a good time, that's like that initial burn that gets it off the pad. But it's going to take some little bursts of energy, these little discovery points to kind of keep it aloft and to get it up into an orbit, right, where it can eventually make its way into a pantheon. But now there's like this funny thing, and like, where, and we've talked about this before, where our interaction, my interaction with games, it changes over multiple plays of that particular game. It starts out as discovery. And then even if those discoveries are accidental, all of these things sort of push me to learning the game. And then eventually I'm going to start playing the game not to learn what's there, but more to tune what's there in a way like a technician does to shave that, little bit of a second off the quarter mile. It's still the same game. It's still in the same arc of me playing it, but we're just further down in that timeline. But it's all one timeline. Yeah. So to me, those are inseparable parts because it's one lifespan of a game. I mean, let's be honest here. Like, I'm a goofball, and I like to joke around and have tons of fun with my games. But retheming a game from being a Renaissance banker to being a cook in the Matrix who's trading in nutrient sludge instead of, silk and spices and such. I mean, that's not going to happen on game 60.
Right.
That's going to happen on game 1, 2, or, maybe 3. And all the fun and laughter that comes with barreling into a new game, they're all front-loaded because once you learn a game, you stop doing that stuff. Now, all that fun being front-loaded doesn't mean that game 1 is better than game 60. It's just really different from game 60. And, that difference is having history in the game and having knowledge of the game. But in a lot of ways, that's the game maturing. It's the fun changing a little bit. Or I guess where the fun of the game exists and what particular itch it's scratching in my brain, those are the things that are changing. They're different, but they're still really fun. I happen to think that I can only enjoy that later chapter in a game because it's the next level of a game along that arc of personal history with a game, right? If I was to be pole vaulted ahead, if I was to skip that early arc and just become a technician trying to be incrementally better than my opponent, I mean, that just sounds like work. I mean, really it does. Like it's just me trying to do something a little bit faster than the person who taught me how to do the thing.
Right.
And that one just like it doesn't sound entertaining. It just sounds hard for the sake of being hard. And maybe that's petty. I don't know. But on top of that, though, I mean, typically in the arc that I have, when I do get to that point of being a technician, I've usually found the one opponent that I enjoy having as an opponent that I find really challenging.
Right. And that leads into the other discussion we had.
And now there's this meta thing, and without that opponent, why would I play the game? Because the meta with that opponent, like that opponent is what makes the game.
Right.
And that has kind of become the best part. And the game's there to facilitate that. But then to step all the way back from it, there's this, all that stuff aside, and all that stuff's really important. But in this really real and practical sense, the ability to be able to learn a game and to jump into that top tier technician mode of thinking where, at what point do I shift from second to third? Like how many beats after the yellow light do I dump the clutch? When players are still learning the basics of turn order, at least for me, like when I'm playing a game, there's a good chance that some of that nuance and some of the kind of finer points of the math that's making the game work, it's not going to stick until the rhythm of the game is something that I'm feeling rather than thinking. And a big part of that is having gone down that long arc of history.
Yeah, no, I know. I think that's kind of where I'm at with it too. There's a part of it that at the most basic level, all games are math. They're all giant math equations because if they're not, they don't work. Like that's the only way to balance them. That's the only way to, assuming it's not a negotiation game, the only way to keep all the victory conditions even, to have all the paths of victory be of the same value, of the same probability, or at least at the probability you want them to be. It's all a giant math problem. And to me, the really great games are the ones that hide that math. Mm-hmm. The story they're telling, the narrative they're weaving, the world they're building is such that, just like the real world, the math becomes kind of intuitive. And you know it's there, but you don't see it. And you're not bean counting with every single move.
Okay, so what you're saying is that by putting the math out there first, having it be this easy to see, you're able to see that this number stacks on that number, and that the math kind of becomes disassociated from the theme, and it just becomes mechanics. It just becomes
it's right
math.
there in front of you, and it's all easy to calculate. And I like how you explained your journey on a game you love. Because that's I think that's where I'm at. I think getting to that second level where I've played all the games, I've had all the stories, I've done, I've seen all of the plot twists of this game. I'm still having fun with it, and the competition level, some part of this game needs to be tweaked to keep it interesting because I want to keep it there. And at that point, you start looking at the math to basically fine tune your game. And at that point, I think, and I have had games like that too, and I think those games didn't bother me for exactly the reason that you just laid out. So that probably is where I lie too. But I just wonder, I've had games in the past, like specifically the competitive games. The games that there's tournaments for at stores and whatnot. Stuff like, Dice Masters or Dreamblade was a big one from Wizards of the Coast. Quite a few years ago, they had it's kind of a miniatures board game. It was really a strange concoction, but the big deal about it was that it was a cash tournament game. Outside of Magic, most tournaments pay out like in product of some sort. And Dreamblade was cash. Like the prize pool for that game was cash. When it came out, we played it, we liked it, it was fun, but it was a cash game. So, that's one of the few games in my life that I have done that. And that is, immediately find the power pieces, find out how they work. And I did not play with anything else but those pieces, right? As fast as I could get a hold of them. And because of that, I found myself and it was a very satisfying game. It was a whole lot of fun. Like we played in tournaments all over the place. We traveled around and did that thing because it was a fun experience, and it was good to have that level of competition. And it was, again, anytime you flush money into a system, that increases corruption and competition. So very quickly, we dove into that, and I didn't regret a second of diving into that at that level because of that. However, what I did notice was that there was no fun, there was no world building, there was no exploration, right? I was going in there with a plan and a toolkit and going to work. And as soon as that game was discontinued, as soon as that tournament scene stopped, even though I had all the pieces for this really great game, I had zero desire to even explore it. And even though technically there should have been probably a million other, little armies or little fun builds that you could make out of it to kind of really explore the game space, having known the math and already known which pieces were the power pieces and already knowing exactly which ones need to be played together and in what order they needed to be deployed, all of that just made that game utterly uninteresting to try to enjoy the story or the theme or, what have you. That flavor of fun was gone. And since the level 2 fun was also gone, I felt when it was all said and done that I had kind of fast forwarded over that game. Even though I really liked it, I had just jumped to the end of the book.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem with playing that way, or why I shouldn't say the problem. It's not a problem. It's my aversion to playing that way, is I feel like there's part of that experience and part of that joy of this game. Okay, like I said, like we compared it in the last time we talked about this stuff, and that collecting board games is like collecting books, and board game authors as book authors. I'm excited to buy the new Uwe Rosenberg, to see what he's got now. I follow that guy like he's an author. So, I feel like if I were to go buy the new Uwe Rosenberg game and already know the most promising path to victory before the game is even out, because I read a strategy guide on Board Game Geek, that I've robbed myself of so much by doing that.
Well, I mean, to dig in, right? I mean, when I get into the mode of play as a technician, I mean, what I'm wanting to do is win. So naturally, I'm going to be pursuing the most optimum. It's not even optimum, right? Because we're not talking about efficiency here. We're talking about the strategy is going to take me to the win more often than not. So what I'm looking for is something that's bulletproof. I'm trying to find the thing that's least fragile as a pathway to victory, and then know what plan B is, and know the alleyway that takes me between plan A and plan B. And this is kind of where the importance of what you mentioned lies, and that is that in order to do that, in order to evaluate those pathways, I have to know what strategy the majority of my opponents are going to take. And it's a fine line, because the difference between tactical reconnaissance on other players and then just joining the Borg of like groupthink or something, it's a matter of being able to see the difference between the extents of a game as a whole and as a landscape and the extents of a game on a table versus a specific set of opponents. And that's really important, right? But the bottom line that's relevant here is that if I read the rules to a game and immediately jump into a forum and have the experts tell me what's important before I even know what's in play to begin with, that's going to make the world of the game really small. And I'm not talking about theme or anything like that. I'm talking about all these like theoretical points of contact, right, that I can have with the game and that me and the other player can have using the game as a mechanism that I can interact with that make the game deep or worthy of greater study. And I mean, it's like from that standpoint, it's really not that much different than going to a museum with someone who like really has a deep understanding of everything that's there, but doesn't like any of it, you know, or at least doesn't find it inspiring or exhilarating anymore.
Right.
And you see this amazing artifact, and you're just thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. You know, what is it? What did it do? I mean, what possibly could have happened to create something like this?" And they just go, "Oh yeah, that's the thing a guy bought. Done. You know, there's nothing exciting or interesting. It's simply exactly what I told you. End of story. Let's move on. Oh, and by the way, he was a jerk." And then you see the next artifact, and you think, "Oh man, well surely this is the one that's amazing." And they just go, "No, well, you know, this is boring too.
Yeah.
You know, just go ahead and shut your imagination down. The world is not that fascinating. History is written in stone. Oh, dragons weren't real either, and if they were also jerks." And the funny thing about that kind of behavior is we think that it's the right of the expert, but it's also like the indicator of an expert to be that way. And I'm finding more and more that isn't necessarily true. And I know I told you about my just awesome trip down to the Johnson Space Center where I got to meet, I mean, all these amazing engineers and scientists. Every single person I met was wide-eyed and fiercely imaginative, right? I mean, the attitude of exploration is knit deep into the fiber of that culture.
Yeah.
And all these people are fiercely brilliant, and they're on a level of expertise that I could never hope to mount in any one topic, much less the ones that they're doing. But we would assume that their job is making the world small because they're trying to understand it and they're trying to explain it. But to them, the world is just getting bigger because everything that's known is kind of in the rearview mirror to them. And each new discovery, once it's known, they can get rid of this thing that they understood halfway because now they understand it wholly. They can put it behind them and they can grip something that they don't have any understanding of and try to figure that out. And in that way, their world is getting bigger because they're constantly looking for the next thing they don't know and trying to find out more things they don't know. And that's kind of what's at stake here. When you jump into a forum and you have someone just hand you the beginning and end of a game before you ever get the lay of the land, it's just like you say, right? If you want to understand the tournament meta of the groupthink so you can best compete in a particular scene, you know, like that's not only fine, like that's the smart thing to do. That is what you need to do to compete. But trusting that knowledge that there's nothing beyond the wall simply because no one's talking about there being anything beyond the wall. I mean, that's kind of a silly assumption. It costs you so little just to peek over the wall, and then suddenly there's a whole continent sometimes, and that's very special. And I love this about gaming because sometimes I'm the guard on the wall telling people there's nothing over here, and then I find out that behind me there's something amazing just because someone else was on an arc of discovery that I didn't find. And this is just something I love about gaming. And I recently shared this story about Race for the Galaxy, where played here at the house, just between me and my wife, we had hit the point of competitive technician style play where we're still having tons of fun, but we had hit that stride of just trying to do it a little bit better. And we introduced the game to one of my wife's friends who wasn't a gamer at all, and she smoked us. I mean, here I was worried about, you know, explaining the iconography like 30 times, and instead she just kind of blew up the board and walked away without looking back.
Gotta tell you, I love the humble brag of, I taught someone who's never played a game before Race for the Galaxy.
No, one, she was that smart, but two, and this kind of goes to show, right? She was interested enough on her own to learn by the act of learning rather than learn by having me teach it.
Yeah.
While we, meaning me and my wife, like, you know, we were playing a game focused on action efficiency and combos, and we were tied to these pretty well-worn ruts. She just came in and she saw the game as this economy where cards were like the commodity, and found all the ways to make money and then bought her victory, essentially. It's not that she was doing anything we hadn't seen, right? But she just assigned it a level of importance that we kind of never gave it. And so she was just that little bit ahead of where we were with that one component. And again, like, we were just doing that same thing where we kind of thought that we had figured out the territory and there was nothing beyond it. And then here just comes a new player, and she jumps the wall, shows us all the real estate that we were ignoring, and just like that, the game went from this simple quarter mile that we were running down to being energized and fun in that original way again. And it breathed a whole new life into playing the game, even if we were still playing it like we were running down a quarter mile. Like, we had this whole new engine that was making us do it differently. And that's part of the fun of playing in a situation that encourages you to hold your tongue, right? Like a face-to-face with friends, and especially if they're new gamers. I mean, you know, you really kind of step back a little bit and let people play. And I think some of that just gets pounded down, right, in the faceless hive mind of online communities. And this certainly isn't to disparage the online community. I mean, I'm a member of that community. I play games there all the time. But I think that when you're just looking at the math on screen and you're disconnected from the other people, you lose things that sometimes, like, kind of knock the game off rails and put you into that new territory where the next big epiphany for the game might be. And those things are rarely on the board themselves, right? I mean, this is the fun of the narrative and social interaction that kind of hovers above the mechanics. And it usually takes something kind of flying in from left field and bumping into whatever the situation on the game board is to spurn that innovation, right? Innovation is always that thing you didn't expect. And I mean, the thing this honestly makes me think about really is back in school, right? We had this professor. It was the craziest thing. We would go in for our juries, right? Our project juries. And we would have spent weeks or sometimes months making these drawings and models, all this stuff in preparation. And you pour every ounce of your brain into this project, and you scrutinize every detail, you pin it up, and you just kind of wait for the firing line. They come in and they take their seats, and before anything is said, this one professor would just jump up out of his seat, walk up to your project, and mess with it. And usually this meant that, you know, he would unpin one of your drawings, look at it for a minute or two, flip it upside down, and then pin it back up. And it just seemed like the most jerkwad, elitist academic move to just tell this student who spent all this time of their life working on a project that the final result of all that effort mattered so little that you could just turn it upside down and it was just as good. But what ended up breaking it open for me, right, was that, so I took a seminar from this professor that was all about developing a language that could communicate. And I mean, this is so in the weeds, but I promise there's a point here. But I mean, so everyone has this ability, right, to look at a piece of art and ask the question, do I like it or not? Very few people, however, have the ability to communicate why they like something in clear and concise terms to another human being. So this class was there to get us to develop those tools. And he was kind of a nut about it because he would just pin up these pictures of like two rocks and then ask us which one was better. We would just look at each other. I mean, like, he just suffered some catastrophic stroke, right? Because are you kidding? It's which rock is better? They're rocks. Like there's no better
He's
rock.
Just rubbing his tenure in everyone's face.
Yeah, so we would just sit there blinking in awkward silence, right? I mean, you know, as you do when someone is explaining in great detail why one rock is better than another. Like, but beforehand, like, he would have us pick out number one or number two. Which one, without thinking, is the one that you prefer? We didn't have to know why. We didn't have to be able to explain it. We just had to pick. And without fail, he would end up telling us why the one that we all picked as better was better. It turns out, like, this is all really simple because there's some pretty basic principles of composition and tonality that we all interact with every day. And there's this threshold of contrast, right, that we find pleasing when we're looking at images. And this kind of can lead to conversations about like textures and sculpture. Like all this stuff is really fascinating, and it makes sense, and it follows rules that are governed. And when you know these principles, you can communicate them. And when you can communicate them, you can start applying them to your own work, regardless of the medium. And it's game-changing, like suddenly learning a magic spell when you have a science fair to compete in. You know, it's absolutely fascinating. Well, this is exactly why he would just walk up and turn your drawings upside down. He was looking for the best version of whatever your drawing could be. And so sometimes he would walk up there and whoop, now your model's on its head or whatever, and he steps back, shakes his head, and then kind of sits back down like nothing happened. Other times, though, he would get up, turn it on its side, and just go, that right there is something special. And if you said, okay, that's fine, but this isn't really, and he would just cut you off and say, no, like, I don't think you understand this right here. Like, this is better. Like, you did a good job, but you just had it turned 90 degrees the other way. I mean, like, I'm commending you, but you needed to have it turned this way. And if you could just sort of let it go and like let go of what you had done, and let go of the idea that what you had done was right the first time, or that the thing you called the floor was actually the floor, and in that mentality say better one, better two, you would see that proportionally and compositionally and all those things that we think of as aesthetically, 90 degrees on its side was, in fact better. And it's not that like he had this magic or this ability to always see the best way, regardless of how it was presented. And it certainly wasn't that he was just this jerk and he didn't trust any of us to be capable of doing anything good on our own. This is what he did to all projects that he ever worked on, including his own. He'd been an architect his whole adult life doing amazing things. I mean, we're talking about one of the greatest in a tradition that no one really practices anymore successfully because it's hard to do. And this was kind of one of his like secret technologies, was that he would draw something up and then just leave it on the table, but not to get away from it. But he left it on the table so that every time that he came back to it, he could come at it from a different angle. After having done that enough times that he'd seen it from all the possible angles, he would pick the one that was best, and then that would become the project, and he would make it work for the design.
Right.
But that's not something that really stopped. I mean, like, just often as he could, he would step back and choose to forget what he was doing just to make sure that the object was good, aside from it being an object that he was making. And that's not to say he was starting all over. He was just asking, like, of the 6 options here, like, am I choosing the best one that's available right here, right now? That's what brings us to board games, right? Is it when we're kind of cemented in this mode of play that says, here's where the victory points are. We're not looking at the game upside down. This is kind of the issue with online play is, since these are games, the crucible that proves attacked beneficial is simply just who wins.
Right.
But if you're going down a road that's brand new against someone playing a strategy that's considered best practice, I mean, even if your side road ends up in eternity to sort of be better, the odds of proving that your first time walking down a road, I mean, it's pretty slim, right? And of course, with communities being what they are, and with games happening so fast, like, even if the odd gambit wins from time to time, it's really easy to overlook those, 90 degrees to the right kind of modes of thinking. And it could take a really long time for those to bubble up. But in table play, I mean, sometimes you can chase little oddities or narratives, right, as vectors that are going to lead you somewhere new. But when you do that, everyone at the table sees it plays out. And they're kind of party to a little bit of the method in the madness. And even if that method only turns out to be a thing that happened, it's still in the minds of more than just one person. Like, it's still not you just screaming at a wall by yourself. But the trick is that you never know what's going to make a game stand on its head like that. You never know what's going to turn it 90 degrees to the left. And, I mean, sometimes it's something really simple, like proximity of pieces, or even just like the weird narrative implications of how the bookkeeping plays out, or something weird like that. And when the game is doing all of that for you online, you end up missing all that. And the game sort of ends up putting those new angles on the periphery, and the game just kind of becomes played through this tiny window of your player actions.
Right. I've experienced something like that. There was a lot to unpack, what you just said.
Sorry,
No, it's fine.
I got going.
To get back
like
on point, I wasn't trying to. You just didn't stop talking, so what am I supposed to say? No. But, what you just said, I've had an experience pretty specifically, and for me, the big game was Seven Wonders. When Seven Wonders came out, it was a near blood rage level of, that is the only game anyone is talking about. It was constantly on Board Game Geek front page. People, before it came out, people raving about it. 7-player civilization game, simple. You can teach it in 5 minutes, but it's the whole, scope of ancient human history and just totally overblown hype for what the game is. But my first plays of that were electronic. I may or may not have had an unlicensed software designed by someone who made allegedly a game about Seven Wonders without a license and just made it so that it would work. And then, it may or may not have been played in various places. But
did it fall off a truck?
but anyway, the point being, this version of it, because Seven Wonders is a very simple game. I mean, it's essentially collecting symbols, right? What that boiled down to was that you could play 20 games of Seven Wonders digitally in the time it took you to play 2 games at the table. And, there was kind of none of that banter. There was none of the, I don't know if I should give you this and that kind of thing that happens in Seven Wonders. It was literally take a hand of cards, count the symbols, grab the one you need, pass it on. Because it was electronic, you weren't even sorting the cards yourself. Like it lost all that tangible material kind of activity with your with your hands and everything else. It was literally just blasting up a list of symbols. And that game taught me, it just conditioned me even. It wasn't even teaching. It conditioned me to just make these snap reads off those symbols as soon as I saw them on my screen. And I played it 100 times. And the game was just empty. It was so dull. Like I could not understand any of the hype or any of the love. And then after playing it 100 times digitally, I finally got to play it in person. And even then, it seemed really dull. Like it was better because playing live at the table is always better than playing electronically. Unless, like you said, you're doing Skype and stuff. That's a good substitute. If you can get your friends together and play a game electronically, but all be Skyping. I mean, that's a good solution. But other than that, the table's always better than electronically. But even with that kind of upgrade of playing it at the table, I was still doing the grabbing the cards, scanning the symbols, picking one and moving on, and was really bored with it. And I didn't understand any of the hype train at all. And the funny part is Seven Wonders has been expanded at an insane level, right? There's 4 or 5 expansions, and they really have gotten into some nonsense at this point. But having that whole brand new card pool of cards, having all of the kind of new, they're kind of new mechanics, but they're still the old mechanics. It's just like another layer of the same type of mechanic, but it's all new cards within that mechanic. Having all that space to explore, but more importantly, the alleged electronic version that may or may not exist was not expanded. So, anyone who has that still floating out there is still only playing the base game.
Allegedly. And
the expanded version of that, I suddenly found, because I had to explore that space, because I was kind of slowly acquiring those cards and looking at the artwork and, sifting them through my hand and everything. All of that stuff suddenly made that game very good again. And, now at this point, I understand why Seven Wonders was so popular when it came out, because I managed to go back and get that level 1 experience, as you called it. I managed to go back and get that afterwards just because of the expansions and because the expansions were so broad and they added so much to the game, I was able to kind of jump back to phase 1 and go through it again. And I think it's really telling, as far as what effect that the electronic versions of these games have on jumping past that exploration layer and right into the math layer.
Yeah. Did you happen to play around with the Summoner Wars app when it first came out at all?
Yeah, I only played with the 2 decks that were kind of the free download on that. I didn't explore into it too deep as far as buying into other factions and stuff.
Oh, I mean, that was pretty early on in apps for gaming. I mean, there had been a few, crusty kind of online implementations of games before that, but at least in terms of, what we call apps now, right? And at least for me, that was one of the first ones that I spent any real time on, and it was after having spent a pretty good bit of time with the game on the table. But there was this groupthink that developed in the app, and I know this is going to be where someone comes in and tries to school me about, here's what really happened in the game. It didn't go like that at all.
The fan base isn't big enough for that yet.
Thank
but it'll
goodness.
Come, John. It'll come.
But, online the games were fast. And, I mean, already, games of Summoner Wars, even on the tabletop, I mean, they were very fast. That was part of the allure of the game. Mm-hmm. You could just wham one out, grab a new faction, and go again before the table next to you even finished setting up. But online, they were even faster because the game was doing the rolls, the bookkeeping, and it was acting as the rules referee, too, about, card powers and stuff. As people begin to play online, the strategy that rose to the top, was that bulletproof, easiest win strategy that you always want for competitive play. But in this game, it was just to turtle and to make your opponent waste their units and resources attacking. Because if you turn the game into a battle of attrition that you initiated, you're going to win because you're going to outlast them because you already have a turn lead on this big drip, right? And even if they turtle too, if you plan for the attrition and you attack their staying power rather than their units, with attrition kind of being the prevailing mode of play, it paid to suit your methodology to that kind of game because that was the current position of competitive play. Anyway, we'll flash forward to me visiting a friend and fellow gamer who had been itching, to play some Summoner Wars because he had been playing it online mostly. He wanted to see some of the expanded content and factions that never made it, to the online implementation. So we threw it on the table, and since his head was still in online play, he went straight into the turtle. And an hour and a half later, we were still playing the same game of Summoner Wars. And it was miserable.
Yeah.
I mean, it was horrible.
I bet.
Now, had this been the app, we would have been done in like 15 minutes. But we were doing it on the table, which was making it just take so much longer. And we realized then exactly why that strategy, hadn't really come up until people started playing 15-minute games of Summoner Wars on the app.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, anyone, and either of us for that matter, could have gone for the win by doing this strategy, but it turned the game into such a slog that I don't think winning the game would have been worth that.
Yeah.
First off, and I can't imagine anyone wanting to win that badly to put themselves and their friends or their opponents through the longest possible version of a game designed to be short. But what's more, when you own a physical copy of that game and you have some 30 armies to play, why would you undermine your box of Summoner Wars, right? By making all these powers and cool factions completely irrelevant. Why not just play identical factions and just have math wars?
Yeah, the asymmetry doesn't work without those Hail Marys. Those are the reasons for the asymmetry.
This really is just kind of another odd tale about how two versions of a game can be so entirely different. I mean, we both learned the game one way on the table, then learned to play for consistent wins on the app, and then return to the table to realize that those two sort of versions of the game, they really only look the same, and they're totally different. I mean, it's almost like they're Alter Earth versions of one another or something. And it's odd to see that can happen,
Yeah, I mean, I've also noticed another weird aspect of this is, how much of board gaming is about actually manipulating components,
Oh, yeah.
and all that stuff. I mean, there's games that overdo it with lots of token shuffling and cube rearranging and that sort of thing. And I'm not talking about necessarily games that have a lot of the busy work. But when you take a game, and I'll actually go right back to Seven Wonders, it's kind of amazing to me how a game like Seven Wonders feels heavier than it is when you are doing all of that component manipulation. When you're shuffling those decks, dealing all the cards out to everyone. And then you're pulling your card, you're laying it down, and you're passing it over. And then you flip it, and now you got to like reach into the pot and get your money, and you got to talk to the guy next to you to see, give him money, actually physically pick up your coins and hand it to the player next to you because you use their brick and whatnot. And all of that stuff makes that game seem thicker.
Yeah.
And it's weird to me, or enlightening, or however you want to put it, that when you take that experience and you put it onto an online game where the computer is doing all of those calculations, and a game like Seven Wonders, it's going to throw up, these are the symbols, and you pick the symbol you want, and it'll tell you, you owe that guy next to you $1, and you hit OK. And then the computer takes the $1 and puts it in the other guy's account, and really your input was, I want that card and OK. And when the game is reduced to that, and like you said, you're just going choice, 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 done, game over. It's weird how those, they're the bones of the design kind of are exposed super quick when that happens, and I find that really interesting. And I wonder how many other games. It almost makes me afraid to play some games that I really like, because I'm afraid that with the computer doing that, the game is going to lose its luster. For instance, I was just looking on Steam yesterday, and they released there's Eclipse on there. And I know Eclipse has been out for a while on iPads and stuff, but they just released it on Steam for PC, and that's where I do most of my gaming. Seeing Eclipse, which is it's a really great space game, I'm kind of afraid to get the app, because I think it'd be great to be able to just play Eclipse whenever I want. But I'm afraid that there's so much kind of bookkeeping for Eclipse, even though Eclipse is very streamlined. That's what makes it great, is that, it's that Twilight Imperium streamlined. So the game is already streamlined, but I'm afraid if the computer pulls another layer of streamlining or adds another layer of streamlining to it, then I'm gonna realize that the game is empty. I'm terrified of it. So I didn't buy it. I'm afraid of it.
I have encountered instances where trying to learn a game through a digital implementation can make it harder to learn the game. I mean, I've accepted, no, it's just a rule, and I have to acknowledge it. That the first time I play a game, I'm going to get it just wrong, and I'm going to bungle rules or forget things, and best case scenario, halfway through, I'm going to have that, oh, this turn order isn't arbitrary kind of epiphany that shows me the game makes sense. Anyway, but more than a few times, someone has wanted to show me a game, and distance between us means that we just pop online, go to a publisher's website or an app or something, and after giving me a cursory overview, we just jump in. And while I know to throw away that first game, sometimes online, it's just like the lessons don't stick. The only thing I can make of it is that it's a lot like your first taste of freedom as an adult, right? Where everything you want just requires you to go swipe your card and money magically flies out of this account somewhere and goes to the person that's holding the game you want to purchase, and then you walk away happy until the time that you do it and there's just no money there and you weren't paying attention to each dollar coming and going from the account. The lesson of where the money went is so much easier to learn when you're physically giving away each and every dollar, instead of it just being numbers that you are trusting to be right, much less just trusting to exist. I mean, this was something I had to learn as a young person in real life, that the money in my bank account was just as real as and of the same value as the stuff in my wallet. Yeah. And it seems like such a dumb lesson to have to learn, that banks aren't magical.
Yeah. Well, it's not unique to you either. That's a human nature thing. I mean, they're, in a lot of ways, I mean, the whole explosion of microtransaction games are actually exploiting that very thing, right? I mean, that's the whole, that's the whole psychology of it. That's why they exist, is to exploit that.
I mean, but this is ultimately the issue with a game doing your bookkeeping. I mean, it makes everything seem so trivial. I mean, Through the Ages online stops you before you finish your turn if you still have actions remaining.
Yeah.
I don't think that's by accident. I mean, it's so easy to click through your turn that I am always thankful they put that there. And I'm sure that's exactly why they put it there. But when you're trying to learn a game, the portion of mechanics, or I guess it's like specifically the part of the economy that represents whatever resource you have to exchange to engage the mechanics, having to physically manipulate the pieces can drive home that interconnectedness
Right.
of resource to action in a way that you might miss if the resources are just flying off your board in some flash animation. I mean, for me, like, it's not uncommon. If I'm playing a game online, I'm probably having a conversation in between bites of a sandwich. And I'm sorry, sometimes I just miss the GIF. But if I was there in person, one, I would probably be much more polite, not be eating a sandwich.
Be eating a taco.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. I would be forced to engage with those portions of the game, those interconnected portions of the game, in such a way that missing them would be on my head and my head alone, because the game had done everything it could. I mean, like, let's just go back to Soulless. I mean, how many times did you say...
Did you pay your worker? Pay your worker.
Yeah, and it
I'm only laughing so I don't cry, John.
It took one of our fellow gamers just looking at me and saying, "John, just stack your workers on your money, so that when you move your worker, you move your money." Which that was just it was so polite, because he didn't need to do it, and it was just for me, and I'm glad that he handed me that methodology.
Right, and honestly, you're not wrong. I did spend more than half the game going, John, did you pay your worker? John, did you pay your worker?
But
John,
no. But here's the thing. The first half of the game, when I wasn't paying for my workers and just cheating, I mean, how many times did I go to take an action as part of my master plan, only to realize, that I hadn't budgeted properly, and I had to just sit there and make puns, right, to pass the time. It wasn't until the visual trick of stacking the workers on the money that it all clicked. And I realized how easy it was to have a turn not end in frustration. But, to take it back to digital games, I've been shocked at how often it takes me more than that one customary game to get up to speed.
Yeah.
And I honestly think it's because of the convenience of the game doing the bookkeeping. And that just deprives me of being able to learn by context. I'm not a person who reads a rulebook and remembers every word. I'm going to learn by moving the pieces around the board. And then when I do, I see that, this creates a problem over there. And then I go back to the rulebook and find the answer. And then the answer matters because it's happening right in front of me. And because I see it, it makes sense. And because it makes sense, I'm going to remember it.
Yeah.
And so learning through that context is important to me specifically. And when it gets taken away by an outside source, I mean, even if it's just another player, for that matter, doing all the bookkeeping or housekeeping,
yeah,
it puts so much distance between me and getting to that wonderfully beautiful discovery phase that I want to be in. And then, because I'm behind the curve, it cuts short the amount of time that I'm going to have there before someone comes up and goes, "Well, you really should only be doing this one strategy, because anyone who doesn't do the strategy shouldn't be playing the game, and if you do, you're wrecking it for all the people who want to do this one strategy."
Is that your Elitacon voice?
Oh,
but yeah, no, I that's probably the case for myself. I mean, that might be why I'm so standoffish to online gaming a lot of times, or online board gaming specifically. In some instances, I wish there was more of it, but I'm kind of gun shy about it. And I think part of that is also what you said. I'm the primary teacher of games, right? Like, if anybody should not have a problem learning a game real quick, it's this guy. Well, but when someone else teaches me, I have a hard time tracking. I'd like to think it's because, well, they don't teach games as good as I do, but the reality of it is I probably just don't. I just don't track. Like, I'm a visual learner, not an auditory learner. I think maybe I avoid it because a lot of times when you play a board game online, there's a tutorial there, but I don't process the game right, kind of learning as it's fed to me slowly. And likewise, in a situation where someone is just going to tell me how to play, which, to be honest, a lot of these online games are kind of like that, because they're not polished AI driven things, right? You can probably learn to play Eclipse from the Eclipse app because it's a polished, designed to have an AI and play you and teach you how to play game. But say just jumping into Through the Ages online like you're playing, the game it's not equipped for that, right? These online board gaming sites, they're not programmed that way. They expect you to already know how to play the game. I mean, it'll bookkeep for you, and it'll automate the steps, but it's still not telling you the whys or the whens. Because of that, I think when I try to play those, I have a really hard time grokking them. And that makes me a little bit hesitant to play them, and I think it's the same effect you're just talking about. Just not being able to kind of do the accounting myself and see how my bankroll connects to what I can do, which is how that connects to, when I can do it, and not manipulating those slowly and methodically makes it harder to learn. So yeah, I agree 100%.
The sad thing is, this means I'm an old curmudgeon like you.
Yeah, I mean you're not adaptable.
Oh no.
I do have a question. Well, just keep recording because
Okay.
you may be able to work this back in. I always say that, we never ever do.
I don't edit anything.
It is related though. So one of the games on Steam that I was looking at was All Creatures Great and Small, the app that has the expansions in it. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'll just buy it that way. It'll be $15 instead of, or $10 instead of 80 or whatever it's going to be to get that game. And then I went through the reviews, and the reviews for it from the users were dreadful. And there wasn't any of the reviews that were like the interface is bad, or they weren't, just video game players going, board games are dumb. It was actually people that say, this is one of my favorite games, and this is why I'm telling you about it, because I know it's one of your favorite games. They're like, this is one of my favorite games, and when I play this app, all I do is check boxes and hit go, and it just sucks all of the life out of this game. So, I was kind of wondering, do you, just taking a stab in the dark, do you think that would happen with All Creatures Great and Small if you were to download the app and play it? Does it feel like that sort of game, like the Seven Wonders thing, where it's just like choose go, choose go, choose go, choose go?
So what I have done to answer this question is I've pulled up a picture of the board, because thinking about my time with the game, right, I only ever remember, tales of victory or defeat, or I guess like whatever approximation you have on a farm. But I have to kind of remember what a turn really looks like instead of kind of thinking about how it feels. Mm-hmm. So I've pulled a picture of the board, and I'm looking at the picture right now, and it's just a spreadsheet with boxes
right.
to click. And I mean, if you really think about not moving your sheep around or pushing your goods, it comes right down to clicking boxes, and I can see it entirely.
Yeah.
But I mean, the fun of the game, I really think, and I know this is the wrong terminology, but especially when playing with both expansions, which I think is the only way to play the game, it's almost like you're playing a possibility matrix, where we both have identical farms with the same pool of identical animals, but it's these buildings that let us, be different on a fundamental level, like even in the way that we interact with our pool of similar resources, right? Even that takes on a different level of importance to each of us. And so leveraging those differences, and because there's so many combinations of differences because of the buildings, that is very interesting. But I guess the odd thing is that if you think of the game as a series of checking boxes, I mean, then the buildings only end up being, like 4 to 6 boxes that you can click on during the entire course of the game. I mean, this is kind of the whole Agricola thing if you really think about it. I mean, in Agricola Prime, the game is really in the cards, the occupation cards.
Right.
You're not pulling a fistful of them each turn to play as you will. You have a precious few, and the whole game is pivoting around each one of these coming into play when you can get them, and specifically figuring out how to benefit from them.
Right.
But seeing what opportunities those few decisions opens up to you, and only you, as options just to then click more boxes. I mean, that's key. But I mean, yeah, I guess like if you're not moving things around, yeah, it's just a little. It's not much more than clicking boxes until you can click the few boxes that ultimately matter. And I can see how everything kind of becomes trivial, and maybe that's kind of back to the whole speed thing, where the game goes by so fast that it's hard to process that one fleeting moment where the menial box and the special box are somehow linked in an interesting way. I don't really know. Maybe.
I mean, that might be what it is. It just struck me as an example of my kind of closeted fear of what what this game would do, like what an electronic version will do to a game sometimes. And those just seem to illuminate that. Like,
I mean, this is kind of weird in that way that it's giving me that little twitch in my right eye, because my gut reaction is to say that this is all the responsibility of the people playing the game so fast as the game is going to let them, that they're missing all of the important decisions. But the counter to that is that if this was a game that I would just pan after playing it on the table, well, then I would be saying exactly what they're saying, that this shows how bad the game really is. But I think that, this is probably just a whole nother discussion we don't want to have, but when you break anything down to its simplest components, I mean, I have this discussion with people all the time in regards to their professions. If people actually labeled their professions as the thing that they spend the most of their time doing, instead of the thing that they get the most prestige from doing, the world would be far more humorous, right, first off. But really think about it, right? Because so much of what makes modern business work is just the soulless clicking of boxes.
Oh, well, good job on naming this episode.
Right? This is kind of the turn. And that is that one of the best things that we can do as individuals is just to stop and to think.
Right.
And whether that's something formalized, like meditation, or it's just taking the time to look out the window with a cup of coffee. I mean, stopping and thinking is one of the best opportunities that we can give ourselves. And by sort of being the only way to that opportunity, it therefore is the best thing we can do. But ultimately, it's just sitting. It's just sitting still. And this is the same thing as my beef with how we label professions. How about a little pride in how we really spend our time? I mean, if someone asked me, John, how did you get this idea? Like, where were you when you broke the gridlock on this really difficult project? And I'm just going to respond, well, honestly, I was sitting there. That's the whole story.
Yeah.
And this isn't mundane. I mean, sometimes good and useful things, sometimes the most useful and the most beneficial things are just that simple. And that simplicity isn't inherently bad. Although sometimes when things are that simple, it can be really hard to get the good out of it. It's like deciding that you're going to meditate, and the whole time that you're sitting there, you're just thinking about how you're just sitting there. Well, you're not going to get any profundity out of that because you're so focused on the simplicity as a restriction rather than letting it be a tool that allows you to focus because you're doing a simple thing. So I guess when it comes to a game like Creatures Big and Small, or I mean any other digital game for that matter, like sure, 90% of what you do is just check boxes. But for me, that's only a bad experience if all that I do in a game where I check boxes is check boxes. If in a game that's 90% box checking, if I find a way to spend more than 10% of my time finding a unique box to check, well, then that was probably a beneficial exercise because I was pushing something uphill. And I think that applies to the whole career thing as well. I mean, if your job is all filing paperwork, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what makes someone good at their career isn't the 90% of effort spent on filing papers. It's them finding a way to spend more than 10% of their time finding the important paper to file or filing the thing that ultimately mattered. And maybe with games, pulling back from the table can kind of point out this idea. And so there maybe can be some real benefit to gaming digitally. But I guess the tragic irony is that when we pull back from that and we strip it down to its simplest part, we end up removing some of the ways that we know that we're spending that extra little bit of effort in beneficial ways.
Right.
And so I guess it's kind of a lot like just sitting. I mean, it opens up so many opportunities to see things and to grow, but it could just be boring. I don't know.
So
you kind of made me think on this one,
right? Right. This is going to be. I don't know. Maybe
I got all zen all of a sudden.
I mean, are you done, or should we? Do you need more material?
No, Jeff. I'm pretty sure we're done. I'm pretty sure we're done.
Let's leave it at that then.